It was a Tuesday afternoon in October 1948, and Morningside Park was burning with the colors of autumn. The leaves were a riot of gold and crimson, drifting slowly down to the pavement where the old men played chess. At the stone table nearest the pond sat Bumpy Johnson. He was playing against a retired math professor named Elias, and the board was a complex web of tension. Bumpy moved his knight, a subtle, quiet shift that threatened the professor's queen. He looked relaxed, his fedora tilted back, a cigar unlit in his mouth. But Bumpy was never truly relaxed. He was simply in a state of dormant alert, like a sleeping panther that keeps one ear turned toward the wind. Watching him from the cover of a thick oak tree 50 yards away was a man named Carlo Vanzetti. Carlo was a professional. He wasn't a gangster in the flashy sense. He was a mechanic, a man who fixed problems for the Italian syndicates downtown. He had been paid $5,000, a fortune, to put 2 bullets in the back of Bumpy Johnson's head. The contract came from a rival faction wanting to destabilize the Harlem numbers racket. Carlo was good at his job because he had no imagination. He didn't think about the consequences. He only thought about the angle, the wind, and the exit route. Carlo stepped out from behind the tree. He wore a long trench coat, his right hand gripping a snub-nosed .38 revolver in his pocket. He moved silently across the grass. 40 yards. 30 yards. Bumpy was focused on the board. The professor was scratching his chin. It was perfect. Carlo drew the gun, leveled it at the base of Bumpy's skull, and squeezed the trigger. Click. The sound was small, metallic, and sickeningly loud in the quiet park. It was the sound of a firing pin striking a primer that refused to ignite. A dud. A 1 in a million manufacturing defect. In the fraction of a second that followed, time seemed to warp. Bumpy didn't jump. He didn't dive. He simply turned his head slowly and looked directly at Carlo. His eyes were devoid of surprise. They were flat, black, and abyssal. Carlo, a veteran of the war and a cold-blooded killer, felt his bowels turn to water. Panic, raw and animalistic, hijacked his brain. He didn't try to clear the chamber. He didn't try to shoot again. He turned and ran. He sprinted through the park, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. In his blind terror, he tripped over a protruding root, scrambling to his get back up, and in that clumsy fumble, his leather wallet slipped from his coat pocket and landed in the pile of dead leaves. Carlo didn't stop. He ran until his lungs burned, ran until he was deep in the subway tunnels, vanishing into the belly of the city. Bumpy stood up. He walked over to the spot where the assassin had stood. He bent down and picked up something from the grass. It was the bullet that Carlo had ejected in his panic to clear the gun, or perhaps just a spare that fell. Bumpy rolled the cold lead between his fingers. Then he saw the wallet. He picked it up, dusted off the dirt, and opened it. Inside there was no money, just a driver's license. Carlo Vanzetti, 412 West 54th Street. And behind a plastic window, a black and white photograph of a smiling woman holding a baby girl. On the back of the photo, written in cursive, Maria and Sophia, my heart. Bumpy looked at the photo, then at the address, then at the bullet. He didn't call his enforcers. He didn't summon the hit squad. He put the wallet in one pocket and the bullet in the other, and he went back to the chess table. Your move, Professor, he said. The rest of the day was a blur of terror for Carlo. He holed up in a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen, shaking, drinking whiskey that tasted like ash. He knew he was a dead man. You don't miss the King of Harlem and live. He expected the door to kick open at any moment. He waited for the shotgun blast. But it didn't come. As night fell, a different fear gripped him. My family. If Bumpy couldn't find him, he would go to the address on the license. Carlo ran out of the bar, racing toward his apartment, praying to a God he hadn't spoken to in years that he wasn't too late. He reached his building on 54th Street. The street was quiet. Too quiet. He ran up the 3 flights of stairs, his gun drawn, sweat stinging his eyes. He reached his door. It was unlocked. Carlo pushed the door open, bracing himself for the sight of blood, for the horror of a massacre. He stepped into the small hallway, the gun trembling in his hand. "Honey, is that you?" It was Maria's voice. She sounded happy. Carlo lowered the gun, confused, and stepped into the dining room. The scene before him froze the blood in his veins more effectively than any corpse could have. Sitting at the head of his modest dining table, with a napkin tucked into his collar, was Bumpy Johnson. The table was set for dinner. There was a pot of spaghetti and meatballs steaming in the center. Maria was pouring red wine into a glass for Bumpy. Little Sophia, 3 years old, was sitting on Bumpy's knee, playing with his gold watch.
"Carlo!"
Maria exclaimed, her face beaming. "Put that coat away and wash your hands. We have a guest. This is Mr. Johnson. You dropped your wallet in the park today, you clumsy oaf. Mr. Johnson was kind enough to bring it back personally." Carlo stood paralyzed in the doorway. He looked at Bumpy. Bumpy looked back, a forkful of spaghetti halfway to his mouth. Bumpy smiled, a polite, charming, terrifying smile. "Good evening, Carlo," Bumpy said. "Maria makes an excellent sauce. You're a lucky man. It reminds me of a place on Arthur Avenue." Carlo couldn't speak. His throat was closed shut by sheer terror. He was looking at the man he had tried to execute 4 hours ago, and that man was bouncing his daughter on his knee. "Sit down, Carlo," Maria urged. "And guess what? Mr. Johnson saw the eviction notice on the counter. He absolutely insisted on loaning us the money for the rent. He said he respects a hard-working family man." The room spun. Bumpy had paid his rent. The man Carlo was sent to kill was feeding his family and paying for the roof over their heads. It was a power move so absolute, so psychologically crushing, that Carlo felt his knees buckle. He sat down at the table opposite Bumpy. Thank you," Carlo whispered, his voice sounding like it belonged to a stranger. "Don't mention it," Bumpy said. He reached for the bread, tore off a piece, and dipped it in the sauce. "We all have to look out for each other in this city. It's a dangerous world out there. Accidents happen every day. Guns go off. Or they don't." Bumpy's eyes locked onto Carlo's. The message was clear. "I know. And I am here." The dinner lasted for an hour. It was the longest hour of Carlo's life. He couldn't eat. He watched Bumpy pick up a steak knife to cut a meatball for Sophia. The blade glinted under the dining room light. Bumpy handled the knife with surgical precision. He could have reached across the table and slit Carlo's throat, and Carlo wouldn't have lifted a finger to stop him. The tension was suffocating, a heavy blanket of dread that only Carlo could feel. Maria chattered away about the neighborhood, about the baby, completely oblivious that the angel of death was drinking her cheap Chianti. Bumpy was the perfect guest. He was charming, attentive, and respectful. He treated Maria like a queen and Sophia like a princess. He was showing Carlo exactly what he was capable of taking away. He was showing him how fragile his sanctuary was. "I can walk into your house, eat your food, and hold your child, and you can do nothing." It was a violation of the highest order, disguised as an act of charity. Finally, Bumpy wiped his mouth with the napkin and stood up. "The meal was delicious, Maria, but I must be going. Business calls." "Oh, stay for coffee," Maria pleaded. "I wish I could," Bumpy said. He turned to Carlo. "Walk me to the door, Carlo." Carlo stood up on shaking legs. He followed Bumpy to the small foyer. Bumpy put on his fedora and adjusted the brim. The charm evaporated instantly. The smile vanished. The eyes went cold again. Bumpy leaned in close. He smelled of expensive cologne and the spaghetti sauce from Carlo's own pot. He whispered into Carlo's ear, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "That clicked today?" Bumpy murmured. "That was God telling you it wasn't your time. That was a miracle, Carlo, and I don't argue with miracles." Bumpy paused, glancing back at the dining room where Maria was humming and clearing the table. "I came here tonight to see if you were worth killing," Bumpy continued. "I wanted to see who was waiting for you. Maria is a good woman. Sophia is a beautiful child. They don't deserve to wear black for the rest of their lives. They don't deserve to visit a grave on Sundays because their father made a bad decision." Bumpy reached out and grabbed Carlo's hand. He pressed something hard and cold into Carlo's palm and closed Carlo's fingers around it. "You keep this," Bumpy said. "Put it somewhere you can see it every day. And whenever you think about picking up a gun again, whenever you think about taking a contract, you look at this. And you remember the night Bumpy Johnson sat at your table and let you live." Bumpy patted Carlo on the cheek, 2 soft taps that felt like thunderclaps. "Good night, Carlo." Bumpy opened the door and walked out into the dark hallway, his footsteps fading away into the silence. Carlo stood there for a long time, unable to move. Slowly, he opened his hand. Resting in the center of his sweating palm was a single .38 caliber bullet. The primer had a small dent in it. It was the bullet that had failed to fire. The bullet that Bumpy had picked up from the grass. Carlo's legs finally gave out. He slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor of his own hallway. He didn't cry. He was beyond tears. He gasped for air, his chest heaving as the adrenaline crashed. He looked at the bullet, then at the light spilling from the dining room where his wife and child were safe. He realized then that he had been killed tonight. The hitman named Carlo Vanzetti was dead. Bumpy had killed him without firing a shot. The man who remained was someone else entirely, a ghost living on borrowed time, granted by the mercy of a king. Carlo never held a gun again. He quit the life the next morning, taking a job at the docks moving crates. For the rest of his life, he kept that dented bullet in a small glass jar on his dresser. He never told Maria the truth, but every night before he went to sleep, he would look at the jar, and a shiver of absolute reverent terror would trace its way down his spine. He understood what the rest of the underworld only guessed at. The most dangerous man isn't the one who kills you. It's the one who has your life in his pocket, holds it up to the light, and hands it back to you. That is not just power. That is godhood.